Hey! Right, I thought I would do something more light-hearted today, sort of quirky facts and laws relating to motorcycles, things that you probably don't know, because to be honest, there's no need for you to know. But who knows, some of you might actually find it interesting and entertaining. Now, before we get into that, first of all, I must apologise for the video that published on Tuesday morning, the Top 5 Royal Enfield video. That's actually a video that I made 2 or 3 months ago when I was having all that trouble with dishonest copyright claims on my videos. It's one that I hid and sort of scheduled for release way off in the future while I worked out what to do with it. I forgot all about it and it went up yesterday, but I decided to leave it up. Now, the other thing which has always been a problem on the internet, obviously I encounter it more on YouTube than anything else, is contextonomy or straw man arguments in the comments section on videos. Now, this actually comes under harassment and misinformation in the new Online Safety Act. Obviously, all internet platforms now have to comply with the Online Safety Act, and YouTube has recently updated its community guidelines policy to include this sort of behaviour as harassment or misinformation. Now, this is when someone takes what you've said out of context and then writes a comment which negates or devalues the content of your video. It's a dishonest representation of what you've said. I think really what kicked this all off is BBC's behaviour over the Donald Trump speech a few years ago, where they spliced together sort of 2 phrases from, that were originally sort of almost an hour apart and made it sound like he'd said them all together to change the meaning of what he was actually saying. People do that on here all the time. Now, I'm not entirely sure why they do it. The only interpretation I can put to it is that they don't like what you've said and they don't have a valid argument against it, so they sort of invent something to make you look stupid or devalue what you've said or even make you look a bit sinister. And the main reason that I'm mentioning it is that people don't just do it to me over the content of my videos, they do it to other people's comments as well, and the unsuspecting victim tries to explain what they actually meant, and it just leads into a straw man argument where the perpetrator ignores the explanation but then starts to throw new elements in just to compound the sort of, the harassment that is subjected them to, and people end up in this sort of doom loop of trying to reason with somebody that just can't be reasoned with. Now, I try my absolute best to keep on top of comments and moderate them if necessary. If someone does this to you, just don't engage with them. Eventually I will find it. The current advice that has been given out by YouTube is that these people must be reported. If they're repeat offenders, they'll have their account removed. You can report them yourselves if you come across this kind of behaviour. Those little 3 dots that are next to their comment, there is a report feature there. It's totally anonymous. But when I find them and report them, and I am reporting them now, I don't engage with these people, I just report it straight away. They are automatically banned from commenting on this channel in the future. So, just bear that in mind. YouTube is meant to be a sort of pleasurable, happy, safe place. You don't have to put up with that kind of behaviour from these idiots. It's a behaviour that I've noticed, certainly over the last 2 years, is on the rise, and we need to stamp it out. I'm glad actually that YouTube has sort of given this clarification on that sort of behaviour, because in the past, it was always sort of borderline. It was difficult to identify whether it is illegal behaviour or not, but now we've got clarification from YouTube, so we know what we're doing. Right, sort of quirky unknown facts and quirky laws that have occurred around the world relating to motorcycling that I thought you might find interesting or amusing. It's just sort of a compilation of motorcycle trivia, really. And we'll start off at the beginning. The very first motorcycle the first two-wheeler historically recorded that was powered by an internal combustion engine. Now, this bike was first showcased way back in 1885 by two names that are associated more with the car industry than anything else. In fact, it was known as the Einspur, or riding car. The Daimler Reitwagen was a collaboration between two names that, as I say, are associated more with cars these days: Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach. And get this, it was made almost entirely out of wood. A wooden frame and what were tantamount to wooden cartwheels. It had a belt final drive and no suspension. In fact, it became known as the Bone Shaker. And it was so ungainly that it had to be stabilised using two external outriggers. Now, I bet most of you already knew that, but have you ever wondered why the kickstand or side stand on a motorcycle is always on the left-hand side? And so is the tang for operating the centre stand. Now, I remember back on my Star Rider course, way back in the very early 1980s, my instructor told me this was because, we drive on the left-hand side of the road, and this enables you to mount the motorcycle from the road side rather than having to step into traffic to get on the bike. Now, I accepted that at the time, but obviously later on in life I realised that, not every country drives on the left-hand side of the road. A lot of the world drives on the right-hand side of the road, which means in order to get on the bike from the left-hand side, you do have to step into traffic and danger in order to mount the motorcycle. But actually, there is some partial truth to this in history, going right back to medieval times. Now, this is anecdotal and some people might contest this, but it's said that historically in Britain we rode on the left-hand side of the road back in the days when horses were our main mode of transport for defence reasons. The main method or weapon of defence back in those days was, of course, the sword, and most people were right-handed, so if you allowed people who might have bad intent towards you to pass you on the left-hand side, you were at a disadvantage. So if you occupied the left-hand side, they would have to pass you on the right, which meant you had your right arm free to defend yourself with a sword in the event of an attack. Now, in addition to that, mounting from the left-hand side made it easier to get onto the horse, because ordinarily a right-handed person will carry the sword on the left-hand side, because it's easier to withdraw than it is to withdraw with your right hand from your right-hand side. And this prevented the sword from getting in the way while you were mounting the horse. Now, the other reason for this is more practical. Most people, as I've already said, are right-handed, which means your right arm is your strongest arm. So when you're mounting the horse, you've got your strongest arm to help pull you up onto the horse. The other thing is most right-handed people lead with the right leg or right foot. The left leg is used more for stabilisation. So mounting the horse from the left-hand side was also the most practical way of safely getting up onto the horse. Now, for those reasons, by the 17th and 18th century, military cavalries all over the world standardised this into their practices for mounting and dismounting. It all started in Britain. Now, although in all probability everybody had forgotten the reasons why we did this, when the pedal cycle became a thing back in the 19th century, the same practices were followed, that you always mount the pedal cycle from the left, which in turn was carried on to the motorcycle. And in fact, in 1975, this was effectively enshrined in law. In 1975, the United States They were getting a little bit worried about the mismatch between one make and model of motorcycle to another. You know, the clutches were in different places, the switch gear was in different places. Even the gear selector could be in a different place. In some cases it was on the tank, or it could be on the left or the right hand side of the engine. They believed that this was causing accidents because riders unfamiliar with that particular make of motorcycle would get on it and they would end up losing control because they were confused by the different way that all the controls were arranged. So they standardized how a motorcycle had to be sort of architecturally put together. The side stand bit on the left was one of the conditions that they put into that legislation. Now, the American market is huge. It was probably the biggest motorcycle market in the world at that time. And so the rest of the world followed their regulations and bikes became standardized, and a left-hand situated kickstand or prop stand became standard with every manufacturer all over the world because they all wanted a piece of the US market. But it all emanates from the requirement of travellers way back in the past to protect themselves from robbers on the highway. Now, I just want to finish off with some bits of quirky worldwide legislation relating specifically to motorcycles. Now, in some cases, I think these are sort of legacy laws that were brought out when they were relevant, but the statute books haven't been updated since. For example, back in the 1980s, when I was pounding the beat, sometimes if you stopped a taxi, I don't know, maybe because he had a light out or something like that, and they got a little bit arsey with you, especially where hackney carriages were concerned, I would sometimes be a little bit arsey back. You see, there was this sort of residual law that had never been repealed, that hackney carriages back in the days of horse-drawn hackney carriages must, for the welfare of the horse, carry some hay, a bag of hay and a bucket of water. Now, it's probably been repealed these days, but back then in the early 80s, it was still on the statute book. So if a taxi driver got a bit arsey with me, I would sometimes ask to have a look in his boot and then would wind him up a little bit about the fact that he wasn't complying with the law because he didn't have hay and water in the boot of his car. You know, these laws do get left on the statute books sometimes when they're completely irrelevant in modern terms. Now, the first one is, I'm going to have to be careful how I word this one. It's an offence in London to have intimate relations with a lady on a parked motorcycle. Thank God I didn't live in London when I was a young man. Now, it must be okay to do it while the bike's moving because it only mentions that it's an offence when it's parked up, although I think that would present a whole set of logistical problems as to how to go about it. I'm presuming it is okay in a parked car because it only mentions motorcycles. In some American states, motorcycles don't necessarily have to stop at a red light. They can treat it as a stop sign rather than a stoplight and filter through if they think it's safe to do so. Now, I think this is probably one of those residual laws that goes back to at least the 1980s when we had pressure pads in the road that ascertained whether or not traffic was waiting at the traffic light. Normally nowadays they have visual sensors on top of the lights, but quite often, if you remember riding back in the 70s and 80s, especially when these pressure pads were well worn, motorcycles weren't heavy enough to actually activate them, so you could end up sitting at a traffic light for 10 or 15 minutes. But despite the changes in technology since then, in some American states it is still on the books. In Alabama in the United States, there is a specific offence of riding a motorcycle while blindfolded. I mean, there's got to be some really interesting stories behind why these laws came about. Alright, here's a good one. Tennessee, it's illegal to hunt any game from a motor vehicle or a motorcycle unless it's a whale. Then there's Oklahoma. It's an offence, a punishable offence, to read a graphic novel or comic whilst riding a motorcycle. As far as I can tell, it's okay to read anything else, just not something that's got pictures in it. And in Youngstown, Ohio, it's an offence to run out of petrol, under the context of failing to appropriately maintain your bike. Right, back to Alabama again. One-way streets or one-way systems. As we all know, it's an offence to go the wrong way down a one-way street in any country, really. But in Alabama, you do have an exception of motorcycles. They can travel the long way down a one-way system, providing they have a lantern displayed on the front. But not while you're wearing a blindfold, obviously. Now, this is a confusing one. In California, it's an offence to jump off a moving motorcycle if it's travelling at 40 miles an hour or faster. But apparently it's not an offence to jump off it at 30 or 39 miles an hour. I've got no idea what prompted that, but it is in the law books. Right, we'll leave those crazy Americans alone for a moment. In Thailand, motorcycles are banned from tunnels and bridges. In Germany, both hands must be holding the handlebars at all times. You can't take your hands off the handlebars for any reason. That's probably what started the biker greeting off on the continent, where they stick the leg out rather than wave to you. In Alberta, Canada, you're not allowed to stand up on your foot pegs, so if you get uncomfortable, you've got to pull over and get off and walk around. You're not allowed to sort of regain comfort by standing up on your foot pegs for a while, not even if you're off-road. In some Indian states, quite rightly, the rider has to wear a helmet, but his pillion doesn't have to. There's no legal requirement for a pillion to wear a crash helmet. In China, and I'm not entirely sure I believe this one, but apparently it's an offence to stop to allow pedestrians to cross the road. In France, if you're riding a motorcycle, you must carry 2 breathalyzer kits and a high-vis jacket. Actually, I vaguely remember that when we were still in the EU, that they were talking about implementing the breathalyzer and high-vis jacket thing here, but it never happened. In Cambodia, it's illegal to drive during daylight hours with your headlamps on. Right, this is a strange one. In Indonesia, ladies riding pillion are not allowed to sit astride the motorcycle. They must sit side saddle, unless they're riding the motorcycle by themselves, in which case they can straddle the motorcycle. Ladies riding pillion are not allowed to touch or hold onto the rider for support. And in some Muslim areas of Indonesia, a lady is not allowed to ride pillion unless she's married to the rider. So what if you need to take your daughter to school or drop your mum off somewhere? I'm not sure about that one. Right, I have to say, I've not been able to categorically verify all of these so-called laws. Some of it may just be hearsay, I don't know, but I thought it would be fun nonetheless. Now, if you live in any of these areas and you can confirm or deny, the actual existence of these laws, I would love to hear from you in the comments section down below. Also, if you live in an area that has a quirky motorcycle law that you think people might like to hear about, again, leave a comment. As usual, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this and my other videos, and in doing so helping to support this channel. I really do appreciate it. I'd also appreciate it if you would leave a like and hype this video if the hype button is available to you. There are other ways you can help me out via my Patreon page, PayPal donations, details of which are in the video description down below, or you can use the super thanks button below the video that you're watching now. Not essential, but it is appreciated. I'm of course going to be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.